So, students always seem to wonder, how do I actually use practice questions as my main study strategy to rank first in my internal medicine board exam? Which is why in this video, I'm gonna break down why should you include doing practice questions as part of your study strategy for exams, where can you find practice questions, what is a practice question, and finally, the step-by-step process of how I go about it completely for free. So let's get into it. Now, part 1, why should you do practice questions? Now, the big problem you probably have when you're in med school is there's an overwhelming amount of study material that you have to cover in so little time. And on top of that, you also have to remember them for longer. And using passive study techniques like rereading, highlighting, and summarizing notes might not help you with that. So instead, using study strategies like active recall, i.e. practice questions, can help you remember more information for longer. And personally, when I was in elementary and high school, I was taught by my parents and teachers to reread my books and notes if I wanted to memorize concepts and topics in preparation for exams. And as a result, I was always at the bottom of my class. But after learning about active recall in the form of practice tests as an effective study technique, it was life-changing. Because I was now able to pinpoint my weak areas or my knowledge gaps, so I was now able to put more effort and time into those things instead of trying to study everything in the textbook, which is virtually impossible. Now, part 2 is where can you get these practice questions? Now, there are a lot of ways you can get practice questions, and one of those is to simply ask your upperclassmen, because most of them would have practice questions in the form of past exams that they have also used to help them get through the year level that you're currently in. Now, another way is to look for review books such as the board review series of books like BRS Physiology, which has end of chapter questions and a 100-item comprehensive exam at the end of it, complete with detailed explanations. If you're studying for the USMLE, for example, you can pay for a subscription to UWorld or AMBOSS, and if you're preparing for the Australian medical exams or the AMC, you can subscribe to M+X or AIMEDX to have more practice questions. Now let's go to part 3, which is what is a practice question? Now, the parts of a practice question are the question stem and a set of possible answers below. And the questions can either be those that only rely on simple memorization, like for example, what are the earliest joints involved in rheumatoid arthritis? Or those which are called two-step questions, which are questions that would require several intermediate mental steps before arriving at the correct answer. Now, here's an example. As you can see in this question stem, it doesn't explicitly state what the patient's diagnosis is. It just states the clinical findings that point to a diagnosis of prostate carcinoma. So in these types of questions, you first have to make the diagnosis of prostate carcinoma in your head as an intermediate step so that you can choose the correct answer to that question. But whatever the type of question is, if you don't use it the right way, it can work against you rather than working for you. So the next step is I will walk you through a step-by-step guide on how I personally use practice tests in my studies. Okay, let's get on with it. Now, when you're answering practice questions, you can do it in 2 ways. Now, the first one is to do simulated exams where you set a timer and then you finish all the 100 questions first before you look at the answer explanations for each of the questions. And doing practice questions this way, where you simulate the exam conditions, makes you familiar with the feeling of taking the exam, so you'll learn how to deal with the anxiety that comes when you're taking the exam under time pressure. Now, the second kind of answering practice questions is to answer one question, again under time pressure, but this time instead of going to the next question is you will look at the letter of the answer right away and see if you got it right or wrong, and then you read the explanations before you go to the next question. This method makes use of the benefits of immediate corrective feedback so that you'll remember the questions you got wrong and you wouldn't incorrectly retain the information you previously misunderstood. But it shouldn't stop there, because there's only a small chance that this exact same question will come out in your exam. So instead of trying to remember the exact question, set of options, or answer to that question, what you can do is to think to yourself, what are some of the other ways that this question can be asked the next time around? And at the same time, how can the other options be turned into questions themselves? Now, this will deepen your understanding of the topic so that you know the ins and outs of it, so that if the exam questions will not exactly be the same as those in your practice tests, and they usually won't be, you will still know how to reason your way to the correct answer. So how do you do this? Now, after seeing and reading about the explanations, you have to then go to exploring why the other options are wrong. For example, why are options A and B even included among the options? Maybe because those two concepts are closely related to the answer, but sometimes not at all. And so the next thing to do is to find out what those options are, what they are, and how do they fit into the current general idea or topic, and how is it similar or different to the answer. So as you can see, I can just keep on doing this with each of the practice questions, and actually my goal here is to not get the correct answer every single time, because that could actually frustrate you more than it could motivate you. So instead, you can just tell yourself that your goal is to be less wrong each time that the same question, same topic, or concept is asked in your exam. Well, let's go to the sample question. What nerve gets injured if there's a fracture in the midshaft of the humerus? The answer here is the radial nerve. And if we go look into this table in USMLE First Aid, aside from damaging the radial nerve, it can also involve the deep brachial artery. And after going through this, you go a step further. Start with asking yourself about related concepts around the topic of upper limb fractures with their corresponding nerve and artery involvement. What if the question asks, what if the posterior circumflex artery is injured? What part of the upper limb is most likely involved? So the answer there would be the surgical neck of the humerus. So as you can see, this is the exact way I go through practice tests as my main study strategy. And because it helps me with making connections among multiple topics, and more importantly, it differentiates them. So I will less likely get confused the next time around. And aside from being a med student before, I'm also a med school teacher right now. And this is exactly one of the methods that other teachers and I use to create new sets of questions from past exams from previous years. If you got to this point in the video, thank you so much for watching. You might like to check out this video over here, which is a video I made about creating your own study schedule. Because when you're studying, you also have to plan out how many days are left before your exam and see how you can fit all of the study materials you have to cover in that time period. So go ahead and check that out if you want to sort of walk through on how I actually create my own study schedule. But thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next video. Bye.